Here's the deal. Sales isn't about pushing harder, talking faster, or flooding inboxes. That's noise, not strategy. Real business development? It's about presence, precision, and knowing exactly how the room feels before you open your mouth. Jake Stahl, author of Own the Room, How to Communicate to Be Seen, Heard, and Respected, has spent over 30 years training teams across 6 countries and 47 states, teaching solopreneurs how to turn conversations into conversion. Known as the mind mechanic, people who have been trained by him say he has the uncanny ability to break down human behavior and rebuild it into real, repeatable influence. This is where communication becomes your unfair advantage. Welcome to Own the Room with Jake Stahl.
Everyone, welcome back to Own the Room. Today, I really couldn't be more excited. We have Bill Blankschaen on. He is the founder and chief story architect of Story Builders, a company dedicated to helping thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and change makers bring their ideas to life through storytelling, books, and learning experiences. Bill is a multiple New York Times and USA Today bestselling author who's guided hundreds of authors and influencers, including, and get this, people like John Maxwell, Lewis Howes, and Kevin Harrington, among other people, towards clarifying their message, telling their story, and expanding their impact. Bill's latest work, Your Story Advantage, a proven path to maximize your impact, influence, and income, shows your unique story and how it can become your strategic advantage. So, Bill, I hope that did you justice. Welcome to Own the Room. We're super excited to have you.
Oh, Jake, I'm the one who's excited to be here. I mean, I love what you're doing and putting together here, and your love for story comes through in all that you do and everything. So, yeah, always great to sit down with a fellow lover of stories and chat about them. So happy to be here.
Great. So, Bill, let's start at kind of the very beginning. Why do you think it is that stories, well, why do you know it is that stories make such a huge impact? I mean, there's a million ways we could talk about things, but stories are what light things up. Why is that?
Sure. I think it's wired into our human DNA. I mean, this is part of who we are. If you look at the history of humanity, the stories have always been there, whether it's around the campfire, in the caves, in the dwellings, whatever. Stories is how so much of our history has been passed down. I mean, we don't have that as much in Western culture right now, but for most of our history, there was intentional efforts to share stories, to pass down what has happened, to teach, to learn, to grow. It all came through stories. And now on the flip side of that, we're bombarded by stories, but we're often not intentional about the story that we're putting out there, right? So maybe for the first time in history, I think we've gotten a little lazy with our stories and we're not being intentional and channeling them well, and therefore not enjoying the benefits that can come from that in our personal brands and our organizations and the impact and influence we want to have in the world.
So I'm curious what you mean by that. You said they're not intentional and we're not sharing them well. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think most people kind of are accidental storytellers. We may, and well, here's what I mean by story. When I talk about story, I don't just mean what has happened to you, the events that have unfolded. That's certainly a part of it and the foundation of it, but more of it is what we've learned from those things and the successes we've had and the failures we've had and the scars we have as a result of it and the lessons we've learned that we paid a high price to get and the expertise that we've built up over time, because it feels so normal to us that we simply don't recognize the value of it. I call it the normalcy trap, right? We think I know my story, I know my expertise. Why would anybody else want that? It feels normal to me. But the fact is, there are a lot of people in the world who would love to get that expertise and have access to it and learn what we know and what we've learned through over the years. And so I think because of that, we just don't value it. So, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, people who are trying to make an impact in the world, they're often out doing things without thinking, how am I sharing my expertise and telling my story in a way that builds trust, that's authentic, that creates something that I want to be a part of, that I fit into, right? So many times it's the classic, you climb the ladder and then realize your ladder's up against the wrong wall. And it's that idea of you build something and realize this doesn't really connect with who I am. And at the core of my story, I want to build something around my message that I want to share with the world. So that's kind of what I mean when I say that we're just accidental. We're not intentional often about our storytelling. Even when we have success, we kind of begin bumping up against a ceiling and we can't break through and we can't understand why. It's often because we're still scattered and we're not really focused in an intentional way.
I love what you're saying. So you brought up a couple of questions for me. The
Yeah.
first one is, how often do you feel that what gets in our way is our desire to not brag or come across as a know-it-all? I hear it all the time from people that I coach. I have a hard time telling my story. I don't want people to think I'm a know-it-all. Do you think that's a valid response to not telling your story?
I don't know if it's a valid response, but it is a popular response, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I call that the confidence trap, by the way. And here's how I say we like to deify others and diminish ourselves, right? We think of most of us do, actually, not
Yeah,
all of us. We all know some narcissists who have the opposite problem.
right,
Um,
exactly. Yeah,
but most of us tend to think, yeah, I'm not worthy of that. I'm not good enough for that. I'm not whatever that person has, whatever magic they have around them that makes everything go their way. But
yeah.
here's what I've learned. I mean, over the years, I'll tell you a little story here. I had a lunch with somebody in New York City a few years ago, and if I said their name, everyone would recognize it immediately. It's a well-known name. And you would think this person has it all together. They've got it all figured out. I mean, they have the mystique and the media and all this. And they confided something in me. They said, when I walk in a room and people pay me good money to walk in a room and tell them what I think, I often struggle to believe, are they just wanting to hear what I have to say, or are they just want my last name? Like, is that what are they actually, is my message actually having value?
Yeah.
And I heard that, I thought, well, that's exactly what I hear from everybody.
Right. Yeah. That's a very
So
common thing.
New
Yeah.
York, LA, everywhere in between, they all have this, we all have the same struggle. We all have the same fears. And so I think one of the first mindset shifts to take place is recognizing not only does your story have value, but in fact, it has tremendous value to certain people who would love to hear it. And that means it doesn't have value, as much value to other people, and that's okay, right? If you try to talk to everybody, you're not going to talk to anybody. So that's all part of the process, I think, of figuring out what your message is, who you're talking to, and getting to know them at a very deep level.
It's fascinating that you say that because I think a lot of times we think people that are famous and have made it
Right.
have that licked, right?
Right.
I got it
Right.
down. People love me. They
Right.
deserve to love me. They should love me. Here I am.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating for people to understand that we all go through that to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to authenticity. And the people that I've worked with at the highest levels are some of the most authentic people behind the scenes. The people that they are on camera or in front of the scene, they're the same people behind the scenes, right? And I've also learned that didn't happen overnight. I think it takes all of us time and intentionality to align who we are with what we do and how we go about it. I don't know if you had this experience, Jake, but I remember as a young, very young adult, actually being conscious of this, that, when I'm with different people, I'm acting differently. Why is
Oh
that?
yeah,
Why
for
am I doing
sure.
that?
Yeah.
And so at the time, I really committed, hey, I want to be authentic. Wherever I am, I want to be the same person.
Yeah.
And I think I've gotten pretty close to that. I don't think I'll ever be perfect in that regard, but being intentional about doing that, I think builds trust, right? People know when they interact with you, you're always the same person. I know what I'm getting. And when I hear feedback like that, I'm like, yes, that's what we're trying to accomplish. Because from a business standpoint, you build trust. People, Zig Ziglar famously said, right? People like you, they'll hang out with you, but if they trust you, they'll do business with you, right? So
Right.
it's that
Yep.
kind of building that trust. It actually goes toward increasing your impact, your influence, and your income.
So I wonder, I agree with all of that. And I'd like to revisit something you said a little bit earlier. We were talking about, telling stories and that we may not be telling them as well. Do you feel there's kind of an obligation for us to share our stories?
Yeah, I think it's a very deep obligation. I even talk about it using terms like stewardship. Like I think we're all stewards of our story. And so I think when we keep it to ourselves out of fear or diminishing ourselves or whatever the case may be, I think we're doing the rest of the world a disservice by not sharing that. And now I think first of all you have to get clear on it. I call it your meaningful message, right? You got to get clear on what it is that you're trying to say and how to say it well. But then I do think it's a stewardship because I believe at the root of it, Jake, I believe every story matters. And and so every person has a story and therefore it matters. That doesn't mean everybody's going to write a book or build a business or all that kind of stuff. Some of the people we work with are nonprofit leaders. We just were wrapping up a second book with one nonprofit leader. He's telling the stories of medical missionaries on the ground in some of the remotest areas of the world doing just
Wow.
incredible work
Hmm.
and telling those stories, right? Those missionaries probably are never going to write a book, build a business, anything like that, but they're having an impact
Yeah.
at a deep level, right? So it's about being intentional about following your calling and that message and being willing to push past the fear and step out by faith and be a steward of those things.
That's a great perspective. I never really thought about it that way. So I think the thing that fascinated me most about stories, Bill, is the story I write about someone when I meet them or after I've known them for a while.
Mm. Mm.
And then it rarely completely reflects the story they have of their own. So I'll give you a great example. I was working with a client not long ago, and again, to your point, they seemed like they had it all together.
Right.
So part of it
Right.
was, why are you coming to me? And when they spelled it out, it became clear. But as we got closer, they told me some very personal stories of some things that they've gone through.
Mm.
And their
Hmm.
personal story clashed so much with the
Yeah.
story I had for them. Is us developing a story for
Yeah.
someone we meet, is that a reflex? Is
Yeah.
that something that's almost like necessary for our survival to be able to look at somebody and go, I know their story, so I'm going to base how I react with them on the story that I created?
I think it is almost instinctive to to interpret the world through a story. But you make a great point that the story that we are telling ourselves about someone or about something or even about ourselves isn't necessarily an accurate story.
Right.
It's based on partial information. So if you think about even the story of ourselves, the story that I tell myself about who I am, it's based on parental input or societal input or my childhood experiences or whatever the case may be that led me to conclusions that may or may not be true, right? And so I may be telling myself a story that's false, and I need to change that story in order to do that. Same thing with other people. We all have biases, we all have preconceptions, we
Of
all have
course.
all those things that we come to that. And so, yeah, I think the story lens, I don't, it's not really hard. I think it's impossible to take off that lens as a human being,
Right.
right?
I
We're
would
seeing
agree.
it through story. And so the question is, we have to be aware of it. How am I interpreting it and approach it with that? I kind of like these three words have been impressed upon me recently: love, learn, and lead. Like, so when I meet someone, try to approach from a love perspective, and then what can I learn about them and from them and through them, and then how can I help lead them in some way to wherever it is that they're wanting to go, right? So it's approaching it with recognizing there's a story, and then let's engage and find out how does my story, my perception of the story, need to shift. But this is where it's so powerful for other people to tell their stories well, because that makes my job so much easier.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what do you want me to know about you? Then I can understand it much clearly.
In neurolinguistic programming, they teach you at certain times of life your story changes. So when
Mm.
you're early in life, you're trying to figure out what your story is. And as you advance, you're trying to create your story. Then you're trying to live your
Mm.
story. And when you get to be old like me, then my objective is to share my story. So even NLP
Mm.
talks about how the story takes on different roles and functions as almost like directly proportional to your age. Any
Yeah.
comments on that or thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, just that I've seen this play out. A lot of the people that we work with are, I'll say, between at least not always. We're working with one 24-year-old developing a book. He's built a following. He's having a massive impact. But most of them have reached a certain age, I'll say mid to late 30s
Uh-huh.
and or beyond. And they've kind of reached the point of, I've built something. What am I supposed to do with this? I've
Right.
had some success. Again, it goes
Yeah.
back to that stewardship. I feel like I have a responsibility to do more with it.
Yeah.
Or I had a great conversation with a gentleman just last night. He's I don't know his exact age, but I'm going to put it late 60s or so, and he's looking to sell his business, and his focus is legacy. I really want to share my story. I want to give back. I want to make that impact.
Yeah.
And this is where why we do so much with books, because they just are powerful tools as legacy builders, and being able to go places that we'll never go. Because I think it's important to realize this, that our story outlives us, or at least it can, right?
Right.
For all of us, people will talk about us after we're gone. But if we're intentional about what we do with that, it can live on for quite a while after we're gone in different mediums and forms and have more impact. So in that sense, yes, there's a progression, and then it goes beyond, right?
Yeah.
Where we are as well.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
This podcast is listened to by a lot of solopreneurs and
sure.
individuals who run their own business. And one thing I'll hear people say to me a lot is, I'm not a good storyteller. Now, the funny thing about that is then they'll tell me a great story about why they're not a good storyteller, right? So it's hysterical the way that works.
Yes.
But Bill, are there main components to a story? Are there certain things a story should hit to have the most impact? Like,
Sure.
does it have to have that high and then that low and then kind of the hero comes back again? What are your thoughts
Yep.
on how should somebody put together a story?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I lay all this out in my book, Your Story Advantage. I
Okay.
call it the storytelling structure.
Okay.
And it's just a five-step process based on classic storytelling techniques. I mean, let's go over them briefly.
Please.
I know you've talked about storytelling in the past, and I think they pretty much align with a lot of what you've talked about too. Attention. Attention is the first one. How do you get someone's attention in a story? And that really comes down to the question of what do they really want? Right. So you have to actually think about your audience. What do they want in this? So many storytellers start from a place of I have a story to tell, and so I'm going to tell it
Right.
the way
Right.
I want to tell it. I don't care who
Yeah.
you are. I'm just gonna, again, we're not intentional. The second step though is tension. So attention, how am I going to get their attention based on what they want? And then the tension part. And this is the part where if you don't have tension, you don't have a story. Imagine, I know behind you, you've got the Fellowship of the Ring figurines
Yep.
up there, right?
Yep.
Awesome story. But imagine if the story went, Bilbo woke up one day, found a ring, went over to the fire pit and dropped it in. The end, right? There's
Right.
no
Yeah.
tension,
Not
right?
memorable. No
No
tension.
problem to solve. There's no hardship. That's what we gravitate to, because we know life can be hard. We run up against hard things, and we immediately are drawn to, ooh, how's that going to turn out, right? What's that tension that pulls me through the story? And so that tension in our storytelling comes from, again, not just what do people want, but what are the problems that they have? Why am I telling a story as a leader in a business? Is it a it's about taking the perspective of me and turning it around and say it's about them. The story is about them. I like to say that your story is about you, but your story isn't for you, right? It's for the
I
people
like that.
that, yeah, it's for the people that are hearing it. And so how can I serve them through this story? So attention, tension. The third one is connection. This is where you, as a storyteller, enter the story. Often when you're talking in this setting, especially in books and brand stories and so forth, but you're only entering in a way that still is about serving them, right? So you're looking to demonstrate to them, first of all, that whatever that problem is they're facing, you've dealt with it, you've been there, you've done that, you've engaged in that. And then second, that you've had actually some success, or you've learned something, or you brought something out of it, right? This isn't a therapy session for you. You're not just, hey, let me tell you what happened to me. Wow, that was painful. All right, well, let's move on, right? But what did I get out of it? And then that lesson, I think, is the fourth one, solution. What's the solution that you're offering by telling this story, right? So if as a leader, I do this all the time with our own team, I'm telling a story, I actually begin with the solution part. What is the main message that I want to get across? And then I go back to the beginning and, all right, now let's make it all about them. What do they
Right.
want? What problems do they have that this is helping solve? Is there a personal connection that I can make? And then finally, the fifth one is action. What do you want them to do? What's the call to action that you have for them because of that, here's what we should do next, or suggest a path forward for them to help make them. It's all about them. frankly. And that's the biggest flip I think that we can make with our storytelling is, I think that is why a lot of people say I'm not a good storyteller for two reasons. One, because their stories are all about them and they feel it inside that something's not aligning with the
Right.
people I'm talking to. Um, and then the other part of that is that they think they're not a great storyteller because partly because of that, because they just go on and put all kinds of details and rambling this way and that way and all over the place rather than just that's not serving your audience, right? It's serving you going off in different directions. So just telling less to make a more potent story.
I like all of that. Tell me a little bit more about your book. So you cover those basic tenets of telling a story. What else do you cover in your most recent book, Bill?
We do. Well, we walk through, I mean, we take a decade of experience and put it into a book form and really simplify it so it's actionable, scannable and actionable. We talk about how does that formula I just talked about, let's apply it to a brand story, figuring out what your message is. I call it your message maker. Whether it's a personal brand or an organization or a business, we help do that all the time, helping people get clear on that and tell it well. Second is the message multiplier. That's an actual book. How do you use that then to create an incredible book and build a book around that same storytelling structure? We build out how to build out your story strategy and that whole phase, and then how to actually structure your book based on that experience so readers really resonate with it. And through that, you build intellectual property. And that's where it comes to monetizing your message. You can monetize your message through so many ways, whether it be podcast or speaking or memberships or trainings or workshops or coaching programs. There's just the list, digital courses, the list is endless of ways you can take that IP and do that. I mean, we've been doing that for the last decade with John Maxwell, taking his IP from his books, turning it into trainings and workshop experiences for his company. It's that kind of thing of, well, actually, a good example of that is, John Maxwell has never written a book about safety in a company, like construction safety, right? When you think
Right.
of John
Yeah.
Maxwell, you don't think, oh, yeah, he
No.
wrote a great book about hard hats or something.
Yeah.
But that's what we did. We took his 5 levels of leadership and his leadership principles and then built out an entire training experience. This was used in some of the Fortune 500 companies right now that is all about how do you, those principles actually apply to people. And that's what safety is really about. Safety is really about people staying safe. And so, how do we as a culture help do that? Right. So, once you build that IP, so many opportunities open up to extend that IP that you may not have ever realized until you did the work to actually build the book in the first place. So that's what the book is designed to do, help people see the value. Then how do I put together a team to help do that? And how do I actually execute on that to take advantage of my story advantage?
That's fantastic. And your company is Story Builders.
It
So
is.
let's talk a
It
little
is.
bit about what they do. I was
Yeah,
looking at your website and doing a lot of snooping around your background, and it looks like you offer
sure.
some great packages for people who
Sure.
really would like to tell their story.
We do. I mean, everything that I just said, I feel like, hey, I want to get clear on my story, my brand story, tell it well. We do all that for individuals, organizations, help you get clear on it, and then extend that into your various digital platforms and how you're presenting yourself to the world. But certainly books, all things books related. We go from idea to publication and everything in between and help people walk through that whole process. So if somebody's thinking, I'm not a writer, not a problem. We do all that exceptionally well, capturing voice. Somebody says, I am a writer, I want coaching. We do that also. We go through that whole process. And we're always just looking to partner with people who have a message that matters, that makes the world a better place. That's what drives us. And then beyond that, how do I create a digital course or a training or workshop or whatever the case may be? How can I continue to do that? We love to walk with people through that process as well. So at every step of the way, we love to come alongside people and help serve them in any of those fashions.
And if I'm not mistaken, Bill, you have a podcast as well, correct?
Not it's on hiatus at the moment.
Oh, it is? Okay.
We're looking to reboot a podcast in 2026. So whenever anybody's listening to this, we are looking to reboot that in the coming year. Yes.
Excellent. So this may throw the conversation off a little bit, but I am curious about one
Hmm.
thing.
Sure.
We tend to really, as humans, stick to one story and maybe forget about others. And the one that comes
Mm.
to my mind, and this is going to seem really off base, but we always talk about the Roman Empire, how it was a huge empire and it
Sure.
dominated so much land on the earth and the sun didn't set on the Roman Empire. And yet the Mongol Empire was 6 times larger and
Mm,
probably more brutal and threatening and got people to surrender before they even got there.
yeah.
So I guess my question is there something that makes a story more memorable than another? Like, why do we dwell on the Roman Empire so much when there were other empires that dwarf them in size and organization?
I think it's a complex answer.
Okay.
Um, but instinctively, as a bit of a student of history, I would say a couple reasons for that. I think the Romans were better at telling and preserving their story.
I'll buy that.
I have yet to read any books by any of the great Mongol leaders or anything. I don't know. They
Very
might be out
true.
there.
Very
Their
true.
focus was different, so I don't think they did as good a job at preserving their story.
Yeah.
Um, Now, to be fair, the Romans were not exactly original thinkers. When you think of original thinkers or think thought shapers in the history of the world, there weren't too many coming out of that era, more before and then after them as well. So they did a good job. I think of, Virgil was a good example. I don't want to go too deep into literary, but
No, that's okay.
The Aeneid, for example, was really a reworking of the Odyssey tale. Let's give the Roman
Right.
bent on somebody else's story, right?
Yeah.
To try to
Yeah.
preserve our culture and so forth. I think the Roman Empire was a much more functional place
Got it.
than theoretical, right? The Greeks were more
Yep.
abstract and the Romans were more, yeah, that's great. Let's get down to business and take over the world. Um, and so I think, the Mongol Empire was there and spread and had impact, but it didn't have a way of passing down that story. So
Makes sense.
even though in many ways the Mongol Empire crowded out the Roman Empire, parts of it,
Yeah.
history got written by the people who are most heavily influenced by that stream of people coming through the Roman Empire. So I think it comes down to who's telling the story in terms of the emphasis. I don't know.
Love the
That's my
explanation.
instinctive thoughts.
No, that's great. I
Yeah.
just know that, we tend to put certain stories ahead of others, even though those stories may not be the most prominent in a certain area.
Yeah.
So I would
So,
be,
so a good example, if I may,
yeah, please do.
I took my family to Japan 2 years ago. We went for a month. We took the family to Japan, went explored a lot of it, and I went to one of the military museums, and we thought it was fascinating, obviously, because we had a military conflict with Japan.
Yeah, of
Still
course.
70, 80 years ago now. I mean, it
Yeah.
hasn't been all that long ago. And so in the museum, we got to see their story about World War II and see it from their side of things now after the
Interesting.
war. And it was interesting because it wasn't exactly the story that I had studied and knew. It
Yeah.
wasn't totally different either. It had clearly been, it was clearly post-war story being told, right?
Yeah.
But it was fascinating just to see the different perspective and how they viewed it as differently and to understand. I mean, it went back hundreds of years before that to see what led up to it in their story to that moment to do it. And when you saw that, it's like, okay, I could see how that happened. Where in the US, people might say, oh my goodness, what just happened? Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
and then you get a, those people must just be crazy over there or something, right?
Right.
It's us
Yeah.
versus
They're
them.
wrong. We're right.
And we see this today, don't we? On the left,
Of
on the
course.
right, those people must be crazy. I don't understand them, and so we can't because we feel like we don't have a shared story oftentimes that's holding us together as a culture. And so I think one of the most powerful things we can do is get to know people and hear their story and learn their story, not just what we think is their story, but in an authentic way.
And it's funny you say that because when people have a joint story, they tend to team up and unite. And I think the best, most recent example
Mm.
was before 9/11, the
Mm,
Dems and the Democrats and Republicans weren't getting along.
sure,
Things were
sure,
really tense. But
sure,
all of a sudden, for that brief, not brief period, but for that
sure,
period around 9/11,
sure,
everybody said, I don't care what our problems are. Let's
sure.
just get together because we're all centered around one story. So
Right,
it's
right.
amazing what you're saying about how
Yeah.
a common story can unite.
Yeah, I do think that was a factor even in the Roman Empire or the fall of the Roman Empire is that they lost a lot of that common story. Like people didn't really buy it. It became very fragmented, and when something fragments, it's more easily conquerable or dividable, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that was certainly part of the part of that, and perhaps part of, I think a lot of empires around the world. And hopefully it's not the fate of the United States. My hope is that we can reacquire a passion for the stories that really are kind of our national DNA, if you will, and that we all share.
So I would be remiss if I let somebody as prominent as you in the story community go without saying or asking
Yeah.
favorite movie, favorite book. What are some favorite stories that have captivated Bill and he really enjoys thinking about, maybe even rewatching or
Mm,
rereading?
man, there's so many.
There are.
My my answers are going to seem odd, probably. Certainly from a reading standpoint, I'm a big fan of the romantic authors,
Okay.
Wordsworth, Coleridge, all that whole group there. From a story standpoint, I actually find myself, I've read, so many novels and nonfiction books. I've read just so many. Um, what I actually find myself doing is, because I spend so much time doing that, is actually reading fiction,
Oh,
like
okay.
almost to let my mind go new places, right?
Right. Yeah.
So just popular fiction type of things like C.J. Box, or just novelists like that, to give my mind some fresh air, if you will. Um, and I'm a big fan of storytelling in television, right? Finding good
Okay.
series that are really character driven, story driven. Blue Bloods, I know it's not anymore, but stories like
I used
that.
to love Blue Bloods. I
Yeah,
used to watch it
yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Maybe that's my childhood coming in, Tom Selleck with Magnum or whatever
Yep.
back in the
Yep.
day.
For sure.
But story people, things like that you can follow a continuous story throughout. I like a lot of things like that just because I think we're drawn to that. We like some level of predictability and familiarity, and yet
Yeah.
some level of freshness. I call that the connection continuum. If you want to connect with somebody, you need some freshness and some familiarity. You need both. You can't just have either or. So I think a lot of that comes into play too. But I mean, I've got my most influential books and things like that, but there's a lot of good stuff that I've read over the years that it's really hard to pick one.
Okay. Well, that's fair. I mean, for a lover of stories, I can see you'd love a wide range and wide
Yeah.
variety of
I
stories. So
mean,
that makes sense.
certainly Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's work is all,
Yeah.
I've read that to my kids for many years. So
Yeah.
some good stories there.
Yeah, there are. It was very unique in just the structure and the creatures. And I had a love for that too. My dad and I used to read that together. So
Yeah.
very close to my heart for that reason.
Yeah. That's
So,
awesome.
Bill, one more question.
Yeah.
Since we talk about this from a solopreneur, fractional, small business owner perspective, any advice on helping them build their story? Any just first steps they could do? So somebody just started their business. They're like, Bill, I need to create a brand and I need to put it out there. What's some advice you would give me on building my story?
Yeah. Well, first advice I would give is get a copy of my book, because that's more
Okay.
than I can cover in a couple minutes.
And give the name of your book again,
Oh yeah,
please.
Your Story Advantage. You can go on Amazon right now and grab a copy, or grab the audiobook. I read it myself. I've been told it's really cool, but anyways, Your Story Advantage, because it walks through this. But I think the first thing people have to do, it really is a mindset shift. It really is recognizing and admitting that my story has value, that there is something of value within me and within my expertise and all of that it does have value. And then getting crystal clear on what I call your meaningful message.
Okay.
And let me give you this one question that I think would be helpful. It's the same question we ask at the beginning of any project, really, but certainly any book project, anything like that. And I call it the story focus question. And that is, if someone were to read a book that you wrote about whatever your message is, or someone were to interact with your business and so forth, whatever that experience would be, and they walk away and they forget just about everything they read, just about everything they experienced, it's gone, it's out of their mind, but they only remember one thing. one thing, what would you want that one thing to be? What would you want that sticky thought to walk away? We just had a salesperson come to our door earlier today. And, if I were him, I'd be thinking, hey, regardless of what happens at this interaction, what's the one thing that I want sticking in that person's mind and heart after I leave this conversation? So for a solopreneur, really getting clear on what's that one thing, because what I think when you get clear on that one thing, then it's about, all right, how do I build an experience or a system or a business or whatever, book, whatever the case may be, that points to that one thing. And if it's not pointing to that one thing, should I even be doing it? Should I even be chasing it? Should I even be putting any effort into it? Because that's the one thing that if I poke through that wall using that, I can have greater impact, influence, and income by focusing my efforts.
Love that. Well, Bill, time unfortunately has flown as it always does. Is there any other, I know you've written a lot. You've co-authored, you've authored some solo books. Any other books you'd like to bring out and talk about?
Wow, there's so many good ones. I'll point to some recent ones that I really like. Book by Mark Pentecost called Life of Your Dreams. It's a phenomenal book. A guy who was a high school math teacher who built a billion-dollar company, and he just pulls back the curtain, shares great stories, but also just frameworks, tools, steps, and so forth. Another phenomenal book is Lewis Howes' latest one, which is Make Money Easy. It's about healing your relationship with money, and when you do that, what the results of actually being able to make money. There's just a really good book. It's a very powerful book. And then a final one for business builders, Four Dimensions of Culture, by my friend Greg Cagle is another one we worked on. Just a phenomenal book. So powerful. If you're building anything with any organization, you want it's a mind-blowing book about culture. And when you think about it through the four dimensions, it changes how you do everything, changes your conversation, your words, your language you use around it, and your intentionality behind it as well. So those are just a handful that popped to mind.
Wow.
There's many more, but
Thank you.
yeah.
And Bill, honestly, listening to the story, I would like to work with you. So give the audience some ways to get in contact with you, the best
Sure.
ways to reach out or find you and your services.
Sure. Well, the best way to reach out for a conversation is to go to mystorybuilders.com/story. mystorybuilders.com/story it's just schedule a call. Let's talk. There's no pressure with that. We love hearing stories. Or you can go to mystorybuilders.com and browse in terms of what we do and so forth and get a copy of Your Story Advantage. There's some cool special offers in that book also that can give some added depth to the experience as well.
Fantastic. Bill, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This was a true pleasure. I loved hearing your story. So thank you for sharing with us. And we'll see you again next time on Own the Room.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out Own the Room with Jake Stahl. If you've gotten value from this episode, share it with the solopreneur in your life who wants to know how to communicate to be seen, heard, and respected. Review and rate the show wherever you check out podcasts. And grab your copy of Own the Room, How to Communicate to be Seen, Heard, and Respected. We'll catch you next week on Own the Room.